Good evening for everybody. My first question today, there are newcomers on the audience, newcomers, new members. Okay, some basic information about my lecture. We step back a little bit. Probably you know that the title of this lecture is Birth of World Economic System. Basically, this course focuses three topics: economic history, social history, and environmental history. Later I try to define each of these directions of research. Finally, this is a classical lecture. I am the lecturer, you are the audience. The choreography a little bit closed. But time by time I try to transfer the function of this course to guided seminar. It means time by time I open questions, I open discussion about some topic, but I try to direct this form of communication. Some basic information coming. Some basic information for newcomers. This is a lecture. I try to define what means the lecture. Value of this lecture is 3 credits. Not mandatory to participation, but I don't like so much lecturing on anti-lecture room. Therefore, each of my lecture I read list of participants. If somebody never participate, no any disadvantages. No disadvantages. It's possible perform the best grade, which possible is a 5. Excellent. Okay. But if somebody participate, each of the course I take into consideration. It's quite a large audience, therefore no chance for memorize each of faces. It's possible, last occasion I told you a story about the wedding ceremony, no? No? I participated, my face memory not the best. I participated a wedding party 10 years ago. And I remember I met with one girl and she knew a lot of information about my life. I was very surprised because I have no memories. And finally I have to ask, we meet somewhere, somehow, somewhere, and she replied, I was your fellow mate for 4 years in the secondary school. Totally forget. Totally forget. Therefore, in the semester span, surely I lost the face. Therefore, much more reliable if I register lecture by lecture the names. No disadvantage, but if somebody regularly participate, I take into consideration the form of taking into consideration. This is my secret. Okay, participate, not mandatory. Okay, I argued. And exam. On the exam period, I opened the window. No? No, open. And later, if the air is cold, I will close. No. Because, unfortunately, oxygen quite quickly expires. Okay, if somebody feels cold, I close it. Okay. Anyway, exam. This period, lecturing period, it's quite peaceful, but we approaching week per week to exam period. The type of exam, a written exam. It's more reliable form, and I have to tell that the grammatical peculiarities I won't take into consideration. Of course, I will find information in the written exam. No. Yeah, in the last week I used the same slide, but I promise that I will take, because in the former time my course take into the fall semester, but the position according to us of faculty of economics I changed, but it means normal exam period started in the middle of May and closed at the end of June, sorry. I will ask 2 types of questions. Definitions, 3 definitions. answer for definition 3, 4, 5 sentences, no more. And the shortest, according to English customs, more likely American customs, I will offer 4 options and you have select only 2 questions. The list of expected questions, of course, I will load up to CoSpace. Okay, personal evaluation, I will write personal evaluation for everybody and I will send via CoSpace communication surface. It's a mailing system. Okay, which are the strategy for preparation to exam? Regular participation on the course, which take into consideration. Moreover, I prepare video records each of my lecture. It's very useful to me. Anyway, I can control my gestures and my communication. In the last occasion, I told to you that the first time when I watched my lecture, I realized I'm so large. The second one, I will loading up to CoSpace documents and books about the subject of my course, and you can read it. And possible personal consultation. Electronically on my course, I will load up each of my slide series to CoSpace, and each of my slide series started with my email address. And personally after the course, but unfortunately after the course I am not the best condition, because speaking and communicate for 1.5 hours, it's quite exhaustive. And in my age it's very dangerous, but I am able to communicate and I try anyway. And other possibility, ask date of consultation, my office number in the very near to this lecture room in the middle of corridor, this corridor. Okay, last week we started define the fundamental concept. Each of scientific cognition necessary define the basic concepts. 4 category of concept. We have to define space. Last occasion I tried to define different approaching to the space. The time, interrupt on the time definition. World economy system, this is the conceptual framework of function of world economy. And finally Europe. Why Europe? Because the world economy system founded in Europe and globalized since 16th century. Look at the space. The space we defined, and I jump to the last slide. Space, historical space, distance. Okay, it's a quick lecture. Okay, we try to define the time. The first timing in the historical time, devices of timing, and we jump back to this slide. We are looking the time as a historical problem, a scientific, a disciplinary problem. There are 2 concepts. The first concept, a linear, irreversible, and cumulative time. What mean? Last occasion I defined, but for the newcomers, not a little bit useful to repeat this definition. What mean the linear? Linear basically mean, according to traditional concept, historical concept of time, the history flowing from the starting point to the paradise. Not a biblical approach, not only in the case of biblical approach, but look at, for example, the Marxism. Probably you know the name of Karl Marx. He, a philosopher, historian, economist, is a polymath. Everybody know what means the polymath? This scholar who able to create innovation, a lot of different disciplines. He was a typical last generation of polymath. And Karl Marx described not only the philosophy, but the history too. And according to the concept of Karl Marx, the history of humankind started in the Paleolithic age, continued in the antiquity on the society of slavery, and the next stage, Middle Ages, in the social structure of landlords and serfs. The next phase is a capitalism, workers and businessmen. And finally, right to the communism. And this is the way of humankind, the human history, flowing. No any different sophisticated structure, only one highway. And every human society walking on the same highway of history. This is the linearity of the historical concept. Why irreversible? Why irreversible? Irreversible means flowing onto one direction. No going back, no possibility. A time machinery creation, no possibility traveling to the past times. It's not possible. Only one direction, toward future. And what means accumulation, increase the quantity. The classical historian imagined the past like a giant puzzle. A giant puzzle, it's a little bit confused metaphor, a huge puzzle. And each historical deeds one piece of puzzle. And a historian tasked finding the puzzle, the piece of puzzle, and taking to the right place. And the picture increases continuously. And the basic problem of historian, for example, 1 meter, 2 pieces. 2 pieces. And have to describe whole of the picture of the history. It's not possible sometimes. Therefore, a large place for imagination and fantasy, for example. Basically, this is the classical historical concept. In the 19th century, each historian imagined the past linear, the history linear, irreversible, and cumulative. But at the turn of 19th and 20th century appeared a new generation of economists. I cited in the last occasion The Wolf of Wall Street, a movie, a very famous American movie with starring of Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah, and it's very interesting. And the basic problem of not dealer, it's how the name, broker, very close to one profession to another. It's maximize the profit anyway, which is the good strategy for increase a fortune. How able to forecast the future? And finally, his mentor told to him, not possible. Taking the money in the pocket and burning the money. This is the right strategy of the broker. No, at the turn of 19th and 20th century existed and created a real strategy for forecasting of future. 2 strategies. The first strategy, a time series analysis. For example, created a different time series, salary, prices, production, and so on and so, and try to analyze and find repeating procedure in the time series. It's named a cycle. A lot of different cycle concepts existed. No time for discuss about it, only I tell you 2 concepts of cycle. I repeated the concept, I repeat the concept of Karl Marx. Probably you know, the Karl Marx wrote about decline of capitalism. Which was the cycle concept of Karl Marx? Basically, describe the cycle in this manner. This is the cycle, from up to down. This is one cycle. Therefore, the conclusion of Karl Marx that capitalism is walking crisis, up crisis, second crisis, and one crisis which approaching in the near future, according to forecast of Karl Marx, will create a collapse whole of the capitalism and open the way for communism. This is one concept. One other economist, for example, Kondratiev, Nikolai Dmitrievich Kondratiev, there is a Russian participant, Russian in Ukraine, Belarus. No?
Russian speakers.
Russia? Somebody? No? Azerbaijan? Okay, excellent. it's quite good. Probably you know, you speak Russian?
I do.
Только немножко. unfortunately. I learned a long time in Russian, but majority of words I forget. Why? Because there are two meaning. I know the word without meaning. My dreams, repeating, I communicate Russian, but I don't know which is the subject of communication. Why? Because there are two types of language. You speak Russian still fluently. Okay, excellent. I try to repeat after today's lecture. I try to communicate, not so efficient. But why? Because the basic problem, two kind of languages exist, whole of the world. The first, for example, Russian, which is the peculiarity of Russian. I will return to the cycle, I hope anyway. Look at the Russian. Russian, the graph of Russian learning, the first phase, it's very slow. Why? Because grammatical system is very, very complicated. But if somebody in a long and slow learning of grammatical system, very quick development possible in the learning of Russian. Why? Because the grammatical structure founds very, very strongly the communication. Therefore, if somebody over the first phase, able to read Gogol, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, everything, the high Russian literature. In the case of English, the first phase is very quick, but after the kitchen level of communication is very slow. Therefore, in Russian, English communication, very, very tiny proportion of students able to communicate high literature level, Dickens and others. If, in the case of Russian, if somebody survived the first phase, opens whole of the literature. Okay, but turn back to the story. Do you know the name of Nikolai Dmitrievich Kondratyev, a Russian economist? Yeah. Do you know some information about?
No, I just heard his name.
Okay. Kondratyev is a typical, a best example of Russian intellectuals. He's a genius. He's a genius. But he was born in that period, before First World War, and participated in the Bolshevik Revolution. Yeah. And very interesting. Do you know the term of how the name is creative destruction? Somebody know this term? Creative destruction. Because the destruction is bad. But one German, Austrian, I remember, Joseph Schumpeter introduced in the middle of 20th century the creative destruction. Nobody? Creative destruction? Economists? No? And creative destruction means that some period, a destruction, for example, a revolution, which is a classical example of destruction, opened the way of new innovations. For example, in the case of Bolshevik Revolution, at least 10 million citizens of Russia killed, but opened the way a new talented person. Look at, for example, university and academic world. This is the world, this is the society of gerontocracy. You know what means the gerontocracy? Gerontocracy? Ruling of all people. Ruling of all people. Because if somebody, for example, started academical career, academical institute and university, if young person, very low salary, very low influence, very low budget for research, and walking up on the hierarchy, high salary, high influence, everything high, but lost the competence. Lost the competence, lost the talent, lost a lot of things. And Russian academy, before the Bolshevik Revolution, a very, very old, very, very conservative institution. And the Bolshevik, half of member of academy killed, half emigrated. Opened the way, new talented person like Kondratyev. Kondratyev, at the beginning of 1920s, received Academical Institute. He was the boss. He was the director of Academical Institute of, I don't know, which was the name of his institute is Institute of Research of Economic Recovery. The first institution who specialized the psychoanalysis. But the career of the Stalinism's epoch of Stalin, it's very dangerous. Because if somebody flying too high, one night a black car stopped on the gate of building and bring to Siberia. And find the paper of a paper about the juridical procedure of Kondratyev and sign personally Stalin. Stalin worked a lot, a great bureaucrat. Each of sentence of death signed personally, like in the case of Kondratyev. Why interesting for us? Why genius a Kondratyev? Because Kondratyev analyzed a cycle in the history, cycles in the 19th and early 20th century. And 1928 brought to Siberia. And in the middle of 30s killed somewhere in Siberia. And very typical, for example, in Hungary. Hungary was a part of the Eastern Bloc. A lot of joke created about Siberia, about, for example, KGB. Probably you know what means the KGB. It's a secret service. It's named I don't know. NKVD. Yeah, this was the former organization. And for example, you know the name of Tukhachevsky? Tukhachevsky, no? He was a greatest general of Red Army before the Second World War, killed by Stalin. Not personally, it's some agent performed. Tukhachevsky. He named the Red Napoleon. One of the greatest theorists of art of war. And for example, in Budapest, in Hungary, there is a Armenian joke. There is Armenian in the audience? Yeah, Armenian. It's a border case. But there is one joke, Armenian joke. It's not real Armenian, it's artificial Armenian. This is a frame. Hello, here, Radio Yerevan. Yerevan is the capital of Armenia. And one man asked me, this is the frame, and inside of this frame, the movable element of joke. And it's true that Tukhachevsky suicide. Yeah, it's true. And how? A classical manner of suicide of Russian officer. Shot 3 times on the back. Yeah, it's a dark joke. Okay, Kondratyev killed in Siberia. Yeah, other jokes, sorry, but it's not so successful. You know the Moskvich. It's a Russian car. You know? The question, Radio Yerevan, it's true that Moskvich able drive on the band with 100 km/h. Yeah, it's true, able only once. Okay, turn back. Kondratyev, a great economist, and published 2 studies about the long time cycle of global economy, and killed in Siberia. But before deportation, published these articles in Germany. In the 20s, quite a good relation, military, economic and social relation, political relation between Germany and Russia. And 1929 started the global crisis. You know the global crisis from 29 to 33. This is the first global crisis of industrialized world. And after the starting years of crisis, started to find who was able to forecast. And Kondratev was one of the person who, in the cycle model, forecasted the first global crisis. Okay, look at the history. How applied the cycle theory? The first historian, a French historian, Enslabus, analyzed the great century before a French Revolution and identified 10 to 12 years long cycle. And the second person whose research we will apply in this lecture, Fernand Rodel, identified secular, more longer than 100 years as secular cycles. Okay, look at the broader secular cycle. Broader tried to describe how unfolded a global economy. He applied a new model of cycle. This is the Karl Marx. Falling down, up, down. Kondratev used a basically different model of cycle. Unfortunately, yeah, here the chart. Kondratev cycle model described a cycle, opposite sign model. This is one cycle according to Kondratev, which adapted by Brodel. This is the starting date, turning date, and closing date. Two phases of cycle, A and B. Okay, look at, according to Kondratev approaching. The first cycle, according to Brodel, started in the middle of 13th century. Why? Because in the middle of 13th century, Europe became enough strong continental trade, organizing continental trade with northern pole and southern pole of Europe. In the middle of 14th century, this is the turning date. If possible, you know, in the middle of 14th century unfolded the Great Plague, the Great Epidemic. It's not a local problem. 30% of Europeans died for one decade. Each third European died in the epidemics. And closed the first cycle of Europe-based global economy at the beginning of 16th century. This is the dawn of great geographical discoveries. Europe opened the way toward Indian Ocean and Atlantic world too. Okay, the second cycle started when closed the first. The turning point of second cycle, the middle of 16th century. This is the great decline of Mediterranean world. Because the classical economy, based to Spain, based to Italy, based to Republic of Venice, Genoa, Florence, this was the Mediterranean world. It's collapsed in the middle of 17th century. The closing date, the dawn of industrial revolution and the political revolution, which appeared in the form of French Revolution. The third cycle started in the middle of 18th century, and the turning point, the more exactly defined 1870. Why? Because this is the closing period after the Napoleonic Wars. Why important? It's not only military operation, closing of military operation. Not only, but this is the starting period of industrial revolution. This is the starting period, a new organization manner of state. It's named nationalism. Before this period, each state based on classical dynastical system. Before the beginning of 19th century, no national states. No national states. Look at, for example, Hungary. Hungary, only half of Hungarian citizens spoke Hungarian. Other half, different other language. Romanian, Serbian, Croatian, Slovakian, other. No problem. Why? Because no national state. The national state appeared only in the early Middle Ages. No before. Before that, existed empires. Hungarian kingdom, no national state. Empire, under direction, different dynasties. The first dynasty, Hungarian dynasty, Arpad dynasty, but the second one, it's a French dynasty, Anjou. Probably you know Anjou, this is the principality in the middle of France. Later, German dynasties and Habsburg, Luxembourg, different dynasties. And which was the official language of Hungary? No Hungarian.
German.
No.
Latin.
Latin. It's very important. Latin. It's good compromise. The dynasty is Habsburg, speak German. Hungarian, half of Hungarian, majority of nobility speak Hungarian, but the communication is Latin. Until the middle of 19th century, in Hungary, official language is Latin. No national state. National state, it's a new innovation. And try to homogenize. There is a French student here, French student. No French student, but very interesting. For example, you know the river Loire. It's very famous. River Loire. It's on the middle of France. Under the river Loire, in the Middle Ages, nobody knew in French. Spoke local dialects, Oc, Provençal, basically different from the France. But in France, assimilated. Why? Because organized an army and organized a civil bureaucracy. And the school assimilated the local people. And for example, there is a Czech student, Czech? No Czech student. In the case of Czechia, in the middle of 18th century, the Czech area, Czech Bohemia is historical name, almost lost the Czech language and converted to German. And a lot of Czech intellectuals relearn a Czech language. Or there are Hungarian students too.
Yeah.
The greatest Hungarian, who is the name of greatest Hungarian? István Széchenyi, who was born in Vienna, and until his death, he spoke much better in German. His diary wrote in German and relearned Hungarian. Because he decided, my family is Hungarian, it's not good that I speak much better in German. It's decision. And this is the consequence of nationalism. And reconstructed whole of the Europe and whole of the European history. Okay, and the closing day is 1896. Why? Because this was the last peaceful decade. The following decade, at the beginning of 20th century, a lot of war, local war launched. For example, in Balkanic Peninsula, for example, in northern part of Africa, a lot of wars before the Great War. And the last cycle, according to Brodo, started when Claus I, and in the middle of 70s, turned down the global cycle. It's not good news for us, because recently it's going down. Whole of the global economic cycle is true, because it's not sure that true, because in the last occasion, last week, I told to you, in the case of rational cognition, there is two possibilities, true or not. Each fact, each theory possible, true or not. And have to open the gate, open the door, that is possible, not true. But probably it's good, it's true, and recently going down. Yeah, why interesting for us? Because our contemporaries who lived, for example, 20 years, 40 years, 70 years long life, the horizon determine the waving of global economy. One example. Probably you know the name of Gulf current, ocean current. Everybody know? Ocean current. started in Caribbean Sea and flowing through Atlantic Ocean and on Norwegian Sea down and go back on the deep area of Atlantic Ocean, Caribbean Sea up, down, up, down. It's a closed circle. Probably you know, each day thinking about the great Gulf current is great. I'm so grateful for Gulf current, but without Gulf current, here in Hungary, average temperature 10 Celsius degree, yearly average. Without Gulf current, 7. This is the same. This is the function of global cycle in the life of contemporaries who lived in the Middle Ages, early modern time, or 19th century. This is the Gulf current. Function up or not function down. Define the frame of life. Okay. About the Fermat-Gödel theory, necessary to mention one important accuracy. If we are thinking about historical event, we have to divide 3 time categories. The first is a short term. A short term. Short term, for example, one historical event unfold short term. For example, this course unfold in the frame of short term. Start in February, closed in June. Less than 1 year's long time span. Short term. Starting, closing. This is the short term. A lot of events in our life unfolding in short term. We are easy to calculate, forecast the time span. But a lot of historical events unfolding according to Fermat-Gödel term, temps de conjoncture, medium term. 1 year, 2 years, and up to 1 decade. For example, your university studies unfolding in medium term. 5 years, 4 years, depend on the business. And finally, the long term, according to French term, long duration, long durée, it's a, how the name is, Gallicism. You know the Gallicism. No complete translation. A little bit like a déjà vu, you know the déjà vu. I have an impression, I saw that, but not the same. We try to describe, but not the same. There is some surplus. Long durée, this is the long durée. A long term, a long processes which able define the frame of our life. This is the long durée, long duration. For example, unfolding of global economy, unfolding of Christendom, Buddhism, Muslim world, this is we can describe only in the frame of long duration. Okay, but we are looking at the history in large point of view. We can identify 3 linear, irreversible, and cumulative historical processes. For the first one, world population. This is the green one, a world population. If we are looking at the history of world population, 60,000 years ago, number of humans in Africa no more than 5,000. 5,000, it's very low. And in the historical past or future, it depends on the point of view, the number of humans increased. In the starting date of Christian calendar, estimate to 40 million. To the beginning of 19th century, 1820, estimate to 1 million. And recently, in consequence of industrial revolution, grow very quickly. Recently, estimate a little bit under 8 million or American English billion. My question, My guess, according to your opinion, it will stop or not?
Yes.
Not?
Will.
I am deaf. Please loudly.
I guess it's going to stop once.
Your opinion, stop or not?
It's going to stop.
Why?
Because we are going to reach a level of the population what we can't keep like that. So, for example, in India and in China, if they stop the growing of the population, it will be a push. So it's gonna fall.
For resource problem, according to your opinion. Resources.
Yeah.
Food and
Yeah.
which is the opinion of Chinese part of. You are working to stop the demographical problem. No? We stop, but not for resource problem. But for example, a lot of novel and movie from Hollywood prepare script of global catastrophe. No. Somebody know what means demographical transition? Demographical transition, somebody know? Okay, look at it. A demographical transition means a transformation of modern society. How? This is the graph of fertility and mortality. Fertility means number of birth, mortality means indicator number of death. Look at it. White is a mortality in the traditional time. In the traditional epoch, the mortality level changed around 40 per thousand. For 1,000 person, 40 dead person. Okay. Up, down, up, down, up, down. And the fertility similarly changed around 40 per thousand. If mortality higher, decrease the population. If fertility up, increase the population. But in long term, it's quite equal, quite balanced. But in consequence of industrial revolution, security of feeding, efficiency of agriculture improved. No clinical curing, only security of food. In consequence of security of food, decreased mortality. Fertility left traditional level high. Why? Because 90% of society peasant. In the peasant society, a poor man fortune a child, a children. No social security. No social security. A poor peasant society guarantee for survival a large family. A large family. In traditional peasant society, 4 generations survive the same strategy. Moreover, a traditional society, historically, very high the rate of mortality. Therefore, the normal adaptation strategy of adaptation, saving high fertility. Okay, but in the second half of 19th century in Europe, stabilized a mortality. Why? Because in new modern level, with help of clinical curing and high feeding security, somehow 10 per 1,000 stabilized and started to decrease natality. Why? Because the society in Europe, societies modernized. What means the modernization? Moved into cities, urbanized. And the urban environment, new strategy opened. For example, education. In Hungary, the education, elementary schools education, became mandatory approximately 1870s. Anyway, before the end of 19th century. It's great strike for peasant society. Why? Because during springtime, during fall time, two places should to be a peasant children. School and on the farms, on the estate of family. I remember I socialized a small village. My mother and my father told to me that my grandfather discussed a lot with the local teacher. Why? Because no missing, no possibility of missing 1/3 only the learning days. No possible, because the interest of economy, a peasant state, interest of education basically different. Increase the expense of education and increase the security of fertility. In consequence of modern hospitals and modern clinical cure, decreased the fertility, and in the 20th century, stabilized somewhere 10 per thousand. This is the modern demographical transformation of modern society. It's happened the same way in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, and in America. Recently, 1/3 of population living in modernized society. We are living in modern society, but 2/3 of humankind living in traditional time. In demographer separate three phases. The first phase is a traditional phases. The second one, the first transitory phases, when generation by generation increase the number of demographical surplus. The third phase, when stabilize the mortality and increase the population, but number of generation is decreased by generation to generation. And the fourth phase is the modern phase, is the stable phase. This is a model. A real world basically different. But the manner of research taking a real situation to the model and try to understand why different. Look at, for example, later I will speak about Africa. According to classical model, should to be much higher number of population inhabitant of Africa. But in consequence of AIDS, epidemics, and Ebola and any others, lost the second and third phase surplus. The Chinese situation a little bit different, because in China decided the decrease of fertility with bureaucratical devices. It's different. And we are taking here, but the concept of demographical translation, if not, if modernized each society, the population will stabilize. According to demographical forecast, the human population will stabilize around 12 billion or million, it's different, British or American English. My last question concerning the demographical translation. According to your opinion, in traditional world, in the traditional society, how long a marriage? How many years long a marriage?
15 years.
10? 10 years long?
I raise it to 15.
15? 5. 7. Why? Because the member of family, very high probability of death. Epidemics, war, and local conflicts. Recently, in the modern society, how long?
15.
7 years is the same, but in the modern time, have to create a new technology. Divorce. In the traditional society, not necessary. Not necessary. A little bit like a game, a gamble. One or other will die, not necessary. And the one indicator of modernization, introduction, global and general introduction of divorce. Okay, turn back, world population. The second one, energy per capita. Energy per capita. It's very complicated. But if we are looking the global history, in the Paleolithic age, the early subraces of human used energy of muscles. After agrarian revolution, applied muscles of domesticated animals and simple engines like windmills and water mills. And later, on the Industrial Revolution, activated the fossil fuels and recently okay, but very interesting indicator in the applying of energy. You know the concept of energetical slave? Energetical slave? No? Nobody? Energetical slave. Introduced by American historian. Yeah, because it's description how many energy we are using one day. It's complicated, kilojoule or calories, not possible to imagine. But look at one person, one general person, for example, 70 kilograms, 70 kilograms, not important male or female, one human working without vacancy and break 24 hours, whole of the day. This is the energy of one energetical slave. According to your opinion, me and you, in normal day, open the, for example, lights, start the computer, and start the television, using the local transport and everything, a normal day, how many energetical slaves we are using? One day. You have to tell one number. 2? Other offer? 20? At the United States, 78. In Europe, a little bit more saving of energy. 65. It's very important. Which is the peculiarity of modern time. We are living in huge quantity of energy. We are living in same living standard like the richest man in antiquity. For example, our conditions, basically different devices, basically different frame, but we are using so many energy, because if we calculate a real slaves, for real slaves necessary to, for example, recreate the working energy. Therefore, for the same energy content necessary double of slaves. In normal real slaves, it means 130. We are living on two basic elements, standards of modern time, are very huge quantity of energy, cheap energy, and cheap water. These are the most important pillar of modern society. Okay, energy per capita. And finally, information. Quantity of information increased unbelievable amount. Look at, for example, in the Paleolithic age, which was the form of information, personal communication. For example, in Celtic tradition, each priest of Celtic druids, you know, the druids, no writing tradition. Each druid had to learn each of poems. This was the basic. Therefore, here the last Druids lost all of the Celtic tradition. And later appeared the printing, later appeared the mechanization of printing, and recently we are creating blocks and different communication on the cyberspace. Therefore, information following the same graph. Okay, look at the world economy system. The world economy system, for understanding of world economy system, very important to realize that there is a trajectory of each of disciplines. The disciplines appeared in the 19th century. Each disciplines had key questions each period. Look at, for example, the geography. The geography key problem on the 19th century, discovery of the world, discovery of Africa, discovery of Asia, discovery of Americas. This was a scientific question in the 19th century. Recently, it's not a scientific question, it's a touristical question. If somebody would like to travel, for example, Indian Ocean, walking in the tourist office and buy a ticket. But in the 19th century, discovery of the world was a scientific question. If we are looking at history, a historical science, a key problem of historical science, description of origin of national states. Therefore, the first generation of historian in the 19th century described history of nation. 5-volume history of German, 4-volume history of Hungarians, 5-volume history of Serbians. Every nation tried to, national states, very important, new creation, it's not what creation, new creation, because before the national states existed empires, multicultural, multilingual, multi-states. And newcomers, it's very important. If somebody, for example, rose in a new upper society, try to demonstrate a great car, great buildings, everything great, because try to demonstrate I have a low participate in the community. A little bit the same the behavior of the national state. Ask the historian, describe the Hungarians. Hungarians didn't exist like a nations. Hungarian speaker existed, some Turkish origin, some Finno-Greek language group, and it's more complicated. No simple question. If somebody take to your question a simple answer, don't believe it. No simple answer. The life generally more complicated. Okay, this is the first generation, history of nation, which are important, the first generation of historian, military operation, political operation, diplomatical operation. This is the history. No, it's not the history. At the beginning of 20th century appeared a new generation. Globalized world created a new question. And appeared a historical researches focused economic activities. The next generation in the 30s and 40s and the middle of 20th century turned toward a demographical and social events. And the next, in the second half of 20th century, turned toward the mentality question. For example, I take you one simple example. A spitting. You know which is the spitting. Necessary to demonstrate? Oh, okay. Spitting in Europe under taboo, prohibited. If somebody would like to spitting, take a handkerchief and walking to safe place, go to the toilet and clean. It's a real problem. Something it's appeared upward to the mouth had to clean. In Asian culture, I hope that my Chinese student verify, there is a public solution, a spitting bowl. In China, no? Spitting, traditional China surely existed a spitting bowl. Not that, it's empty. Existed in China, no? I'm so sad. But a traditional Chinese society, the spitting into the bowl, it's existed. One society prohibited.
Japan as well. In the
Japan.
Traditional way.
And not so good relation between Japan and China. Yeah, in Japan and Korean, it's spitting, animal. Okay, but spitting in Asian society, somewhere in Japan, it's publicly possible.
30 or 40 years ago, there's anywhere in the cities, there's a war for the spit.
Yeah.
Like, how to say, the dust balls.
Okay. Yeah, and look at one other example. It's a failed, the spitting. Look at, for example, the clothes. In the traditional society, the cloth is a social code. Walk into the museum and you are looking one cloth. You are able to judge age, who we are, marital status, social status, everything. The cloth is a social code. If somebody walking in front of him or her, able decoding. Recently individualized. Everybody in the morning decide which kind of the clothes wear. It's not individual decision. Why? Because we are living under pressure of marketing and create a different model. For example, in this lecture room, I can separate different frames. For example, the black wearers. I am the black guy. It's dangerous. And very useful if somebody is too large. optical information is more thin. Yeah, for example, black one, it's one this kind. And for example, other type of clothes is a blue one. 2/3 of audience blue and black group. Yeah, therefore, recently officially individualized wearing of clothes, but practically not, because we are under a marketing. Change of mentality. And the newest direction of historical research is ecological aspect of human history. Because we are not only a bearer of culture, but we are animals. We are animals. If somebody, for example, if I am hungry, I became very aggressive. Therefore, before the lecture, I ate a little bit. So, look at the first generation of Anna School. Somebody listened about something? Anna School is a French school, a French historical school, the first great historical revolution. Founded University of Strasbourg by Lucien Febvre-Narbonne, very famous French historian, and introduced two basic terms. The first basic term, histoire totale. It's very easy to translate to English. It's a total history. What means the total history? The total history means each of historical events. Mentality, clothes, spitting, cleaning of nose, everything is a part and subject of historical research. The second one, a long duration. In the history, not only the generation structure usable, but some even cultural, economical, and political event unfolding more longer historical span. The key person of second generation of Anna, Fernand Brodel, I will show to you some picture about him, and Leroy Ladurie. So, how appeared the concept of global economic system? Introduced by Immanuel Wallerstein, 1974. Some information about his biography. He graduated at the United States and didn't receive job. It's a quite general problem in the case of graduated students. Therefore, traveled to Africa and participated different aid programs without any success. Traveled to Zimbabwe, later South Africa, Botswana, a lot of Uganda, lot of country, lot of program, lot of project without success. And take the question, why? Why work for 10 years without success in Africa? And finally realized the basic reason, Africa and African country participate a global economy in peripheral status and receive the worst card on the play. Therefore, for solving these countries' problem, have to understand the function of global economy. Other conclusion, the global economy unfolded not only after the Industrial Revolution, but much before, on the age of great discoveries, in the middle of second millennia. The second milestone, in the middle of 70s, introduced a new research results that capitalism appeared in Europe. Why? Crucial question. Because for a long time discussed a capitalism, not a European even. Why? Because we are living a Middle Ages determined by nobility, noblemen, which are the most important value of noblemen: prestige, honor. Look at the capitalism. Which is the most important value? Profit, rational decision. No connection, prestige, honor. Thanks a lot. Yeah, not a personal message, but the name of you. Okay, capitalism, profit, feudalism, honor. It's not possible to connect. Not by chance, in the German history, discussed about this problem. Werner Sombart, it's not age of Nazism, much before. Werner Sombart, a German historian, Werner Sombart argued capitalism created by aliens, not from the space. Jews, Muslims, Armenians, like a virus. And Max Weber argued it's not true. Capitalism, it's a European event. And published a famous study, a capitalist spirit and the Protestant ethic, and I don't know, probably the same ethic of capitalism and the Protestant ethic. The basic conclusion of Max Weber: the capitalism introduced to Europe in the early Middle Ages, not early modern times, by Protestantism, Reformation, the religious Reformation. Later we will discuss about it, but these researches verify that Max Weber is true. Not aliens introduced the capitalism. Capitalism unfolded in the frame of Europe. Which is the next milestone? Verification of proto-industrialism. Later I will analyze what means. And finally, Fernand Braudel rewrote the original concept of Immanuel Wallerstein. Immanuel Wallerstein, recently a working person, and I show to you one short speech of him, because very important, if we are speaking about people, we are looking the people. Unfortunately, not so loudly, but there is a subtitle.
I think what you described is my search for the appropriate unit of analysis. And what I came to feel some 30 years ago is that all of modern social science, the last 150 years, has had explicitly, or at least implicitly, a unit which was in fact the state. And so we assume that social action occurred within the framework of the state. States had political structures, states had economies, states had cultures, states had unities of various kinds, and each state was in some sense independent logically of every other state. They were not where social action occurred. It occurred within the framework of larger historical systems, which I call world systems. And then, yes, I thought that the modern world system was a break, a significant break from previous kinds of world systems, and that it took the form of a capitalist world economy, and that therefore to understand the modern world and how it operated, one had to see it as a developing historical process of the creation of, a functioning of, an expansion of a capitalist world economy, which initially, I have to say, the word world does not mean the entire globe, it means a large unit. But in fact, one of the characteristics of the capitalist world economy is that over several centuries it expanded to incorporate the entire globe by the 19th century. So I shifted my emphasis to a different unit of analysis, which was that of the world system, and concentrated my concerns on the modern world system, which, as I said, was a capitalist world economy. And it was true that then turned me to necessarily some basic epistemological questions. I didn't realize that at first, initially, but I realized that when I started getting criticized for not conforming to various epistemological norms that I then realized were widespread and oppressive, if you will, but in any case I thought incorrect. So it is true that I had to turn my attention then to the questions of what is a discipline, what are the boundaries of discipline, what's the logic of a discipline, and then what I now talk of as what are the structures of knowledge that we have constructed to frame the ways in which we think and the ways in which we teach others to think, which is the university system, and whether they're adequate, which I don't think they're adequate, and I don't think they're correct, and I do think they're breaking down, but that's another story.
Yeah, which is the most important conclusion of this short lecture. The most important conclusion that the problem of nationalism and the problem of global world is a new problem. Recently we are opened a newspaper, electronic or paper newspaper, journals. It's recently there are globalists and regionalists or nationalists. It's 500 long problem. It's not a new problem. It's appeared even 500 years ago. Look at this problem. If we are looking at the world system, according to Brodel, we have to separate two concepts, two approaching of world system. Economie mondiale, as written by Fernand Brodel, world economy, this is the frame, contain each economic organization. And the second one, world economy with hyphen, between the world and economy, économie monde, in the French version, is integration. One economically integrated part of the world. Look at, in the 12th century, according to Brodel, the world economic system, birth century is the 12th century. In the 12th century existed 6 world hyphen economy, world economic integration. The first one, and the most developed, China. Chinese historians tell frequently, China was the most developed country, whole of the history, and recently China take back to the throne. Happened the Industrial Revolution and some misunderstanding, but it was a temporary. China was the most developed and we are the most developed. It's possible. China, in the 12th century, the most developed country is China. Second one, India. And the other important peculiarity of India, the most developed region, whole of the world, in the Middle Ages, located to India. Next guess, or today's last guess probably. Which Indian region was the most developed whole of the world? Before the Industrial Revolution. The richest one.
Around the river Ganges.
And Brahmaputra. How named?
What's its name?
Yeah, region's name.
I don't know.
Bengalia. Bangladesh recently. One of the poorest countries whole of the world. Very interesting. Look at in the 12th century, calculated, it's artificial calculation, but calculated the how the name is GDP, gross domestic product. GDP in Bengalia, Bangladesh, 190 US dollar. 190 artificial construction. But for comparison necessary, on the same time, in France, 120. Recently, in Bengalia, is 700 developed, but in the case of France, change the paradigm. Change the paradigm. Okay? The second one, India. The third one, Islamic world. In the 12th century, Muslim world more developed than Europe. And Europe, Western and Central Europe, later I will speak about geographical frame of Europe is different to recent modern condition. Western and Central Europe, only fourth. Amerindian culture, Aztec and Inca culture is very important to mention that Americans lived in copper age. No iron technology, iron melting technology, only copper age. And very interesting, a little bit consequence of French orientation, Russia. Take Russia to the 6th position. Why? Because Russia was between a Muslim, Chinese and European world. No part, nor Muslim, neither China nor Muslim or European world out of other integration. We can discuss about it's right or not, but I have to mention, somebody know why so sensible for Russian culture a French scholar, French culture, which is the basic element of strong connection between France and Russia. No? Nobody knows. If you are, for example, read Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, the great author.
Speaking French.
Yeah, the second largest French speaker community lived in Russia because each noble family's children necessary to learn French. It's other question, later we will return why. Because the French was the global communication language on the 18th and 19th century. Why? Because the consequence of enlightenment, consequence of great intellectual performance of great French generation, not by chance, the language of diplomacy for centuries, French. Language of postal service is a French. Language of traveler was a French. Okay, but turn back. This is the rank list on the 12th century. The next question, how we can able define a world-economy, a definition. Sorry, it's a mistake, I will correct. This first element of definition, area which can be circumscribed well, able to define when close and when start a new economic integration. Very easy to define. Boundary of one world economy where the trade more expensive than the profit. Not reason organized. Some area, its geographical condition define the boundary. For example, between China and Russia, Gobi Desert. One of the driest part of whole of the world. Gobi Desert separate. One caravan walking through the desert per year. And not each year survive the caravan which are walking between Moscow and Namibia. Or in the African history, the white Africa and the black Africa separated by Sahara Desert. This is the boundary. The second element of definition, each economy word direct one central city. Not two, not three, only one. This is the list of European guiding cities. The first one was Venice, Antwerp, Genoa, Amsterdam, London, and the next one moved out of Europe is New York. But this is the list of European cities. Why interesting? Only one guiding city. If we are looking this element of definition and looking the recent condition of the global world, very easy to understand why so unstable. Because there are three central areas. Eastern coast in United States, southeastern part of Asia, former time Japan and recently southern China rather, and European Union. No clear guiding area. Free guiding area. Unstabilized global economy. And the last one, economically hierarchical area. Core area, peripheral area, and between core and peripheral area, a semi-peripheral area. Very important define how we can define the peripheral, semi-peripheral area. Core area, easy. The most expensive, for example, look at, for example, cost of lodging, technology, and organization, global organization, location. This is the core area. Peripheral area, it's very easy to define. Underdeveloped area, some area are using the barter trade, no money, it's very poor, it's a peripheral area. But very difficult to define semi-peripheral area. For example, Hungary, it's a core area, or peripheral area, or semi-peripheral area. But look at a more complicated question. Look at France, great period of France. Louis XIV, it's how the name is, Louis XIV, the King of Sun, the greatest army whole of Europe. It's central area, core area, or semi-peripheral area. Use the democratical practice. Who votes core area? One? Semi-peripheral area? Majority reluctant or listening problem. So, semi-peripheral area. Why? Because indicator of semi-peripheral area that the most important economic decision taking different place. For example, in the case of Hungary, recent Hungary, the most important economic decision taking in New York, Peking, Berlin, London, different. No Budapest. It's a typical indicator of semi-peripheral situation. Look at France. France in the 17th century had a greatest army. But the economic decision took in Amsterdam. Why? Because in the 17th century in Europe had 12,000 trade vessels, ships. 6,000 sailed under Dutch flag. Therefore, international trade under direction of Amsterdam's bourgeoisie. And may discuss in Paris or Madrid or London, but happened which decided 2,000 Calvinist trader in Amsterdam. Okay, thanks a lot for your attention.